this is Eric with Add Some Tech, a podcast where we talk about technology and advertising and how those two intersect. Today on episode 007, we are going to be talking about Snapchat. And I'm going to make a bold claim, and then I'm going to try to back it up as best I can, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So, Snapchat is the new Twitter, and that's not a good thing. So hear me out. On a recent episode of the Ask Gary V show, Gary Vaynerchuk comes out and says that Snapchat is the new Twitter. And that's not that bold of a thing because other people in the industry are saying the same thing. There's an article on Recode, and I'll actually link to it, where they talk about another person making a very similar claim. I do want to point out that the first time I heard it was from Gary Vaynerchuk, so I kind of want to make sure that is clear from there. But anyway, it is something that is a big deal. The Recode article talks about how Snapchat and Instagram are the new TV. So it's kind of... What I want to kind of hit on is that this is not a new comparison, and by making this comparison, I think it actually explains what Snapchat's fate will be eventually. So let's do a little history lesson here, and let's talk about Twitter. So Twitter was compared to newspapers back in the early days of Twitter when it started back in 2006. It was considered to be the new newspaper. If you think about the climate that was going on at that time with the newspaper, this is when, in 2005, 2006, this is when they started noticing kind of a drop in readership, this kind of concern that maybe they should move to the web. And it was kind of a big debate at the time, but really, if you think about it, 2006, that's a year before the iPhone, there was not a consumer mobile device on the market that really allowed you to consume media like we can today. We hadn't had this huge revolution yet in mobile devices, so it's still kind of one of these concepts that's still out there. RSS is still a big thing, at least in the techie world. I don't think it ever really took off, which is why Google killed Google Reader. But it was this concept of I want to be able to deliver the news that I want and control that experience. And so I really think that's one of the reasons why Twitter fit really nicely into that, is that it gave you kind of this headline news ticker kind of concept. And it gave it in a way that dealt with the technological constraints of the time. So one thing that was really big is its character limit. Character limit fits into SMS text messaging character limits. It allows for Twitter to send tweets through SMS. So I think that's really, really critical, and especially when it was released at the time of 2006, even into the early 2010s, people had phones that really weren't capable of the mobile web in being able to take advantage of going to Twitter and stuff like that. The SMS option was so much better because of the push notification. So, it's funny. I mean, looking back, there was a Windows mobile device I owned back in, I think, 2009. And I can't remember if it was the fact that the Twitter app for the phone was garbage, or if it was just I didn't have an option. I couldn't go to the mobile site because it wouldn't work because they didn't have a WebKit browser on that phone, and I just I couldn't do it in any other way. I don't think the WAP browser allowed some of the functionality I wanted. So anyway, I ended up setting up the SMS option in the late 2000s. So it was something that even at that point, that SMS feature, that kind of bite-sized feature, was a really nice feature. So it allowed that kind of push notification, very much like in front of you at all times concept that Twitter could be kind of in that space. So, if you think about kind of where Twitter was, and kind of if you just kind of look back at the articles, there were so many people heralding Twitter as kind of the savior to news and the savior to print. And a lot of journalists were on Twitter, still are on Twitter, and it's really that kind of platform. And it didn't make that transition. I mean, what we're seeing today and what the conversation we're having right now about Twitter is Twitter dead? Did Twitter make a mistake and not get to that spot? I mean, we're looking at it now, hindsight 2020, and Facebook really is the dominant platform, I mean, leaps and bounds. But if you look at it from a newspaper perspective, Facebook is the new newspaper. Facebook made some very strategic moves with getting partnerships with the Washington Post, now with instant articles. They have done a very good job of positioning themselves and positioning their algorithm to display exactly what you want to read when you want to read it. And so they really, I really feel like they kind of sat off to the side and watched as Twitter made mistakes and was able to kind of pivot and make sure that their platform was ready for this revolution that we're now in. And a lot of people do consume their news through Facebook or their gossip through Facebook. So, that's essentially what ended up happening, is that everyone heralded as Twitter being this savior to newspapers, and really Facebook is, I wouldn't really consider them a savior, but they have become the dominant player in that and making that shift. So let's talk about Snapchat now. Snapchat being the new television. If you think about where Twitter was at the time, with all of the issues that were kind of there in terms of not having the iPhone out at the time, having phones that really weren't capable of huge amounts of data, and having something that's really low powered, and that being really good for text delivery. Snapchat kind of fits into that exact same world at this time. If you think about where we're at right now, Snapchat started in 2011. And if you think about 2011, if you even think up to now even, a lot of people are still walking around with 16 gig. Actually, I would say a great majority of people are walking around with 16 gig phones. A lot of people are still walking around with 8 gig phones. And if you're on the Android platform and you have an older phone, you're lucky if you have 8 gigabytes of storage in your phone. So Snapchat really came out of this concept of kind of destructible images, and that is something that is really powerful on a phone that doesn't have any storage. So, you take a photo and it disappears. It's great. I don't have to store that. I can still enjoy what my friends are doing without having to manage my storage all the time. And that's one of the things people hate doing, is trying to figure out what to delete and what not to delete. So basically making the statement of, don't worry about it. You don't need to keep every single bit of thing. We're not going to keep it on our servers. You don't need to keep it on your phone. Don't worry about it. That's the whole premise of this entire platform. And for kids that are taking pictures of funny things they see on the side of the road, to, things that are lewd, and they think that this is a safe way of being able to share something that is inappropriate. All of that range, Snapchat really fits into that. I would argue that the former instead of the latter is really the main reason why Snapchat has moved forward so much. I mean, there's so many text message images that I send, or iMessages, that are just stupid. Like, I don't need to keep those. And it would be great to say that that's going to just delete itself after the person reads it. I don't need to keep it as a part of my timeline. And, but that's such a difficult thing to manage and to deal with, that it's just easier to make a platform that's the premise altogether. So there is a part of that. And I think that is what's made Snapchat really where it's at. But if you think about just the concept of Twitter being a news ticker, and that's what kind of made it kind of really great for news, for television, the concept of television is that you're flipping through channels, that you're just flipping through things and you can't go back and see that thing because you've already passed it. It's already happened. And now Snapchat isn't necessarily that, because you get to see it in its full entirety and then it disappears. But at the same time, it's a very similar concept of flipping through channels and going and seeing what your friends are doing, and you move on with your life. You don't have that ability to just go back. There's a timeliness to it, and it's very similar to television. And what a lot of people are doing with this concept of like showing something on there, these TV shows, the Snapchat stories, stuff like that, that's where people are trying to create and trying to make content on these platforms that is very much like television. And if you think about it, that's where it gets kind of interesting, is because this is what the premise that Snapchat is built off of. And while it's doing that, it's interesting to look at a competitor that is learning very closely what Snapchat is doing. But before I get into that, I want to hit on this concept of kind of the Snapchat user and kind of that thought process. And I want to use a particular little case study, and it was my brother, my little brother. He is 21 now, but when he got on Snapchat, he was under 21, and he didn't have Instagram, and he didn't use email. He's kind of like the typical person that most people are writing about, and the most typical Snapchat user. And what was interesting was when he met his wife and he started down that path, and when they got married, his shift from Snapchat being the way he communicated with people to going to Instagram. And I think that's a really key thing, is that Snapchat's claim to fame is, I just want to have pointless conversations. I just want to have fun with my friends. That concept, it's a part of a time period in their lives. But as soon as they get to that point where they get married, they have kids, they start doing things that they want to chronicle, they want to remember, platforms like Instagram make a lot more sense. And he had a hashtag for his wedding. People could take pictures and they could add it to that hashtag. That's a typical thing that you see with Instagram, and people doing that with events and trying to get people to crowdsource photos for events. I mean, that's such a cool concept, and that's what Instagram has become for people, is for people to be able to chronicle and log. This is, here's a bunch of pictures that people took at our wedding. Here's a bunch of pictures people took, at your bridal shower and things like that. That's the kind of stuff that Snapchat's not going to be very good at, but Instagram is. And so that concept of that kind of age, and as you grow up, you kind of grow out of Snapchat and you grow into Instagram. But what's interesting is kind of the counter argument, though, is, well, that's great. That means Snapchat will always hold this premise of being for young people only. Because why would adults want to be a part of this platform unless they're kind of holding on to their youth, or they're up to no good on this platform. If they're just hanging out and having just good old clean fun, this isn't the platform for them. And so that really, again, that keeps weighting towards advertisers and going, this is a perfect platform for young people. But I want to hit on something, and it's kind of the problem that happened with Twitter is similar to the problem that Snapchat's going to run into in a couple of years. So Twitter was really, going back to what I was talking about with Twitter and the technological things at the time, Twitter was built off this concept of being essentially taking advantage of a platform or a series of platforms that really weren't capable of rich media. And so it was this concept of 140 characters, this really small bite-sized thing that would bring you to a web page or show you information. But a lot of people would just consume what they saw in that tweet. AP did a really good job. CNN and Fox News, a lot of these news organizations got their news tickers down to 140 characters. And were able to send news that way, and people found ways around it in terms of adding things like one of two, two of two, so they could write longer form comments and keep the same consistent thought. So that was something that really made Twitter interesting. But as time went on, and as we've kind of moved into this era of where people are doing most of their work on their phones, and their phones are just as good or just as capable technologically as their computers were, Twitter's relevance has started to wane in terms of, well, I want to do more. This discussion of making a longer character count is becoming a bigger and bigger thing, because it really doesn't make sense why there is this limitation anymore. It doesn't fit into the world that we live in now. You can argue that it's what makes Twitter unique. It creates a certain type of content. It's a bite-sized content. People talk about that, but that's it's kind of like saying that MySpace, their big claim to fame was custom HTML that you could put in the back end and make, autoplay videos and stuff like that. It's cool for a season, but after a while it becomes really obnoxious. It really isn't bringing anything to the platform. It's really holding the platform back. So it's interesting, as technology has progressed, Twitter's relevance has waned. And looking now at Snapchat is built off of, really not built, but it is living off of this concept that people's phones are garbage, essentially. Why would you want to keep anything that this phone takes? It's a cheap, 2-year contract, free phone that your parents gave you. So, you talk to, again, taking my brother into consideration, when he was using Snapchat, I would talk to him about, hey, have you tried out Rdio? Rdio was something that both he and I were using at the time for music. And he said, hey, I can't use Rdio because I don't have any storage on my phone. And he just kept saying that over and over again. He had a prepaid Android phone at the time. I think he had 2 gigs of storage internally, and then had an 8 gig card he could put in. So he just couldn't download a lot of things because the amount of storage that the app would take up would overload his system, and he couldn't offload it to the SD card. So Snapchat, though, was something that worked really well on his phone. And what made it it was something that was really functional and allowed him to kind of communicate and hang out with his friends. And I used to sit next to he was a coworker of mine, and he would be using Snapchat a lot. And I would ask him, why do you use Snapchat? And it was the same thing. It's that, hey, nothing else works on my phone. I have a hard time getting on Facebook. I can't install Instagram. My phone is not capable of handling an app like that, but I can handle Snapchat. And I think if you want to be doing anything photo related on your phone, and you kind of look at the whole landscape, and you have a phone that really honestly has virtually no storage. I mean, just right out of the box doesn't have storage. Snapchat really is your only option. So, and this coworker of mine, he had a Motorola Droid 2 or 3, I can't remember, the slide-out keyboard phone. And he even made the comment. He was a photographer, and he said, "Why would I keep anything on this phone? Like, why would I keep any image I take on this phone? This phone is garbage for taking pictures. I just want to send something to my friends real quick." So, but if you think about all these comments, Snapchat is not built on some grander concept. It's really being built and being driven by a technological barrier. And that technological barrier is phones have no storage, phones have crappy cameras, and really the concept of, even if you do have good storage and you do have a good camera, I mean, you're starting to send huge images over the internet, and the data networks the way they are with data caps, it's really not going to be beneficial to be uploading and downloading such huge images. So, I might as well just use a platform like Snapchat. And Snapchat is not known for high-res images. So it's interesting to kind of look at that and kind of think, well, what happens when everybody's walking around with at least a 32 gig phone? What does it look like when everyone's walking around with a 20 plus megapixel camera and they just go, you know what? Taking a picture on my phone is worth keeping. When that starts happening, when the general market starts looking at that and going, that's it. I mean, this is the platform. This is where I'm going to devote most of my time in taking photos. And changes the landscape. And it really kind of calls into question Snapchat's validity moving forward. But I want to hit on not just the validity moving forward. I think this concept of TV is interesting. I think the concept of creating content like that is interesting. But I don't think Snapchat's going to be it. I think Snapchat's going to be where a lot of people try it, where a lot of people start, because that's where a lot of the innovation is happening. But I think what Mark Zuckerberg has done by buying Instagram and very slowly working on the back end and working on the advertising side of it, as an advertiser, I think Snapchat is stupid. What has been offered by Snapchat really doesn't allow for smaller brands to really be effective in that market. It's very much styled in the concept of how you sell TV ads. I actually I talked about this in a previous episode, and in the episode of Flavor of the Week advertising, what Snapchat is charging for some of their ads, it's really cost prohibitive for a lot of people. Instagram, on the other hand, is super easy. And if you're already spending money on Facebook, it is such a breeze to be able to do. And so, being that, number one, you have essentially a platform that is really being built off of a premise that this is where people are right at this moment. And, it's really kind of taking advantage of technological barriers at the time. If you think about it from a long-term perspective, Snapchat is not going to be where the bread and butter of businesses is going to, of your business is going to be made over that platform. Now, I will say this, Twitter, if you kind of look at Twitter and kind of the downfall of Twitter, I still think Twitter is beneficial for certain groups of people. One of the ways to talk to the people that subscribe to Add Some Tech is through Twitter. It's through DMing people. It's by sharing conversations and stuff like that. I wouldn't say to anybody, especially in the podcasting world, hey, you should just get off of Twitter. It's totally worthless, and don't advertise on Twitter or anything like that. But all what we're doing is organic. It's not actually advertising. I'm not paying for Twitter ads on here for Add Some Tech. And I'm not paying for it for really any of the clients that I work with. And it's a big deal to say that. Especially when you look at Facebook and Instagram and kind of the success on those platforms, there's a lot more that you can be done over there. And I've even considered doing that for Add Some Tech. I think we're a little early before we start doing advertisements and stuff like that. But that's kind of the thought. Just even in this is where my audience is they're on Twitter. I still don't see the validity of ads on here. So I think for a lot of people, I think there's going to be a lot of really cool things that people are doing on Snapchat, but doing it from an organic standpoint, I think that stuff is really awesome. And I think that's a really cool way of using the platform. I don't think that Snapchat is really going to find its spot in terms of of being able to be a platform that, number one, attracts people, but also is a way for advertisers to reach them. I don't think they've really answered that question yet, and I don't think they will answer that question. So it's just something to think about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. You can also drop a comment in SoundCloud, in YouTube. There's a range of different places. By the way, I'm also on Anchor as well, so I'll be dropping some comments and some questions out there, kind of just to get some thoughts from the community, just to get some ideas of what would be great to talk about. So anyway, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I will talk to you all soon.